One thing that I have noticed is that we really struggle with origins. No one can remember their own personal origin, aka when you were born. We cannot figure out our origin as a species. When and where exactly did we enter the picture? The origins of life still remain a mystery. And even further than that, the origins of the universe itself. The current scientific model is everything began from some mysterious point. It appears that this particular brand of memory loss is just written into our experience of reality. And the way that this is taught, this entire process has been totally random. Life on this planet, evolution, is a random process. Any other viewpoint on this is considered at best fringe and at worst downright insane. Orthogenesis is the belief that evolution has a rhyme and reason to it. Evolution has a direction. It is going somewhere. That life is complexifying. I mean, if life started off as, microbes, cells, you and I are ultimately made up of these. So we have to be more complicated than them on some sort of level, right? Orthogenesis used to be a widely held belief, but it didn't hold up to scientific scrutiny, so it was promptly abandoned. And to still believe in it is considered to be bad thinking. But we're going to revisit this idea, and I'm going to try and explain it in a way that makes sense to you, because it appears obvious that your life in general, even this universe, there is a trend that is occurring. And this trend is absolutely mind-bendy, wacky, and trippy. And it exists within this blind spot that the sciences will always have. This all deals with consciousness. If you switch this viewpoint from life complexifying and you switch it to consciousness expanding, then it all makes complete and perfect sense, and the trend is obvious. Consciousness is mutating across dimensions. It is some sort of spanning of dimensions, and it is trying every possible way to reach some sort of point. It is trying out every type of mutation that will get it to where it's going. Kind of like if you have a security code and you create a software that tries every possible combination until you figure out all of the correct numbers. It's sort of like we are in this dark room, and throughout history, life has been slowly fumbling around trying to turn on various lights in this room. And it appears that the end goal of this process is total illumination. When you think about the history of life on this planet as we know thus far, we trace things back to some sort of microbes that came from the ocean. The only life on this planet at one particular point was these microbes. And when you look at microbes, many of them have what's called chemoreceptors. That is the way that they perceive reality via chemical stimulation. So the concept of sound, for example, even though there was life on this planet, there was no sound, and life slowly mutated into that space. Our senses are a prime example of this. Life discovered sound. Life discovered light. Life discovered all of these various domains of experience. These are like dark areas of the room that are being lit up. And this may be the hardest part of this to explain and to also conceptualize, that when all there was microbes on this planet, these microbes are conscious. All of life is conscious. And this is something that a lot of people don't want to talk about or accept because it comes with, I guess, a certain level of responsibility. But these microbes are conscious. They are alive. They make decisions. It's just that their form of consciousness is different than us. We sort of view them as almost like these nanobiological machines that follow a predictive script, but to them, they aren't following a script the same way that you aren't following a script. It's that we have this higher dimensional perspective to where we can pretty much predict everything that they're going to do. But to them, in their perspective, they are operating in their own little world. When I talk about dimensions, these are just available perspectives through which you can see the world. It is just a way that you are able to experience reality. And for example, with these microbes, they have chemoreceptors, and their entire reality model is based around this. They only understand going towards or away some sort of chemical stimulus. So the way that they would perceive the world is some sort of 2D framework. They only know towards or away. If you could somehow jump into the experience of a microbe, you would perceive reality in 2D. I know that all of this is impossible to actually prove, but just humor me. If you could experience reality as a microbe, you would be experiencing it in some sort of 2D framework. Even though for us, when we are viewing a microbe, we see that it is floating around in some sort of 3D matrix, some sort of liquid, for example. We see it in 3D, but to the microbe, it isn't living in 3D. It only knows forwards or away. A very famous example of what I'm trying to describe here was the bug walking across a Mobius strip or a Klein bottle that to the bug, it believes that it's walking in a straight line. But to us, we can clearly see it moving across 3 dimensions. But to this 2D perceiver, it can only understand straight, forwards and backwards. The same way you only know length, width, and depth. You can't jump into next week any more than this microbe in a petri dish can jump out of it and at your face. So if all there was this 2D perspective, how did you and I get here? Where did this 3D perspective come from? Mutation. We mutated into this space. Over time, life began to mutate different senses, different receptors. Something mutated photoreceptors. There was the tactile receptors and the sense of sound, etc. In order for all of these new senses to make sense, there had to be a new dimension to it. Could you imagine processing light but within a 2D framework? You would see things going behind other things and just appearing to completely vanish from existence. You would encounter all kinds of situations that just don't make sense. And you would eventually have to expand your perception in order to navigate this new domain of light that you have found yourself in. And I know this term consciousness triggers people. So if you could just imagine life has been sort of expanding its own perception. It has been sort of crawling across dimensions. You can imagine it that life started with DNA. DNA is this weird point where chemistry turns into biology. This would be some sort of one-dimensional perspective where it is just pure instructions being given and instructions being followed. This is obviously something that we cannot fathom what it's like to be. But if I had to place this point anywhere, it would be some sort of 1D perception of just linear information. This is going to go to this codon is going to do this, etc. And this 1D perception gave birth to this 2D universe, all of these microbes. And this 2D perspective mutated and formed this 3D perspective that we all currently have. Think about all of the evolution that took place just spanning these 2 or 3 dimensions. Think about all of the life forms that we commonly call the natural animal kingdom. All of these various mutations as explorations of this 3D space. And this went on for a very long time, and it appears to be where we currently are. But you and I, us humans, we are late to this party. As a matter of fact, we may be the final members of it. This is ultimately what I and many other people believe, that it appears we were placed on some sort of different trajectory from the rest of the animal kingdom. We were called out of the simple exploration of this 3D domain into some other domain. Consciousness is trying to mutate into some other domain yet again. Perhaps this is the 4th dimension. You know, we seem to have this obsession with time as human beings. We are, this is what statistics is, as I talked about in my previous video. We are trying to predict the future, to bridge this gap between this 3rd dimension and this 4th one. I mean, that is the entire goal of physics, for example, to create a perfect model of the universe. But it's not just to have some sort of glory for glory's sake. It is to make predictions. That is the key factor here. That if we can know what's going to happen before it does, we have parlayed ourselves into some higher dimensional perspective. And this appears to be what everyone is trying to accomplish. And you can view this strange cognitive ability that we all have as the new mutation that gives us access to a new domain. This is the domain of the imagination, the mind, some sort of mental space. Whatever you want to call it. This is sort of like when the first microbes developed photoreceptors and discovered this entire domain of light. And from the discovery of that domain of light with photoreceptors, it wasn't long until eyes entered the picture, and you had all kinds of different types of eyes, different strength and depth of perception, etc. And the imagination is just as real of a domain as light, sound, tactility, smell. It is just like all of those. We are just the first creatures that have developed the eyes to see it. You could almost say it's a third eye, just like the name of this channel, wink, wink. But it's an eye that looks within. It's an eye that is able to see some other domain. When you view the imagination as a new domain, then you see how it makes sense. You can find things there, discover things there. All of our great quote unquote ideas have come from the exploration of that space. You can become injured there. You can encounter things in the imagination that hurt you. And you may find this to be strange, but the part that is the most convincing of all of this for me about the imagination being a domain is that we encounter things there that don't make sense. A prime example of this is a singularity. I talk about singularities often on this channel, and I'll have my most recent video displayed on the screen. But to quickly surmise it, a singularity is some sort of point or junction where our known metrics and systems that we have in place to understand this universe we live in, that we use to predict things in this universe, it's simply where they cease to do that. You could say that the rules appear to fall apart once we reach a certain threshold or junction. Singularities pop up in all sorts of different academic disciplines. We see them in math, physics, astrology, and the most popular version of one is a gravitational singularity, which are associated with black holes. But there is rising evidence that Black holes don't actually contain singularities. Well, if the singularity isn't in the black hole, where is it? We can play a little game here that when we use our logic to try and describe this universe, we keep running into these objects that don't make sense. For starters, we know that it's real because we can prove it is. Secondly, we know that it doesn't make sense. And thirdly, we see that it isn't out here in this world with us. That doesn't really leave us many other options. There's only one other place it could be, where it always has been, within the imagination. These objects only appear whenever we are thinking about things, whenever we are trying to do logic or to perform some sort of action that doesn't make sense within 3D space. I've done videos on several of these objects. They normally involve trying to peek past the veneer of dualism, trying to think about what lies at the end of infinity, what came before the first thing, what's inside of the smallest thing. These are all objects that lie within, I call it the realm of forbidden thought. Our perspective is just not allowed to detangle and cope with these ideas. And these singularities, for example, where reality just doesn't make any sense, you can sort of think of it like when the first microbe developed sight and it encountered its first corner. Could you imagine transitioning from some sort of 2D perspective to seeing your first corner, to go from a world where these types of things don't exist to suddenly discovering an entirely new plane of existence? These are what these singularities are like, and many physicists actually believe that these gravitational singularities are some sort of expression of extra-dimensional phenomena. And just using deductive reasoning, if we are able to view reality via 3 dimensions, this is our perspective, where our perception ends, some other dimension has to begin. And it only appears that our perspective ends when we look into this imaginative realm, when we look inward. If you want to call it the psyche, the mind, the subconscious, I have always claimed on this channel that I believe it is connected to some other domain, some other space. It is a point of gestalt. It is where something becomes greater than the sum of its parts. It's sort of like you with your cells. At a certain point, at a certain threshold, you stop being just a group of cells working together and you become a human being. Where those 2 points meet, I believe it is some sort of dimensional intersection. And I believe that where this point is for us, it is somewhere within the imagination, the psyche. It is within the subconscious of the human being. It's sort of like, how would you explain to yourselves that today we're going to go to the movies and watch Deadpool 2? Isn't that fun? They only speak chemistry. They only live inside of their own little world, their own little universe. And similar for us, that if there was some other higher dimensional perceiver, it would probably look at us the same way that we view these microbes. We probably don't have free will to it the same way that we don't think microbes have free will. It can see what we're going to do tomorrow. There aren't really any surprises. The same way you know that if I inject this chemical into this cellular environment, this is what's going to happen. It's sort of like medicine. And I could really go off on an entire tangent just on that alone. You know, when you really think about it, would that make all of these encounters with the quote unquote divine, when you think of this Jesus phenomena, when you think of Moses and this quote unquote divine intervention, would that simply be some higher dimensional being injecting medicine into this 3D world we live in? And a lot of these things that I'm saying, people have brought this up before. Jung, for example, this whole idea of the subconscious being connected to the collective unconscious, some people call this the overmind. There has always been this suspicion that there is something within our minds that it's sort of like this untapped frontier. But to wrap all of this up, when you actually view the history of life on this planet, you can see that things aren't just randomly transpiring, but rather there has been an invasion of domains. There has been some sort of mutation across dimensions into higher and higher perspectives. And I could really talk for hours about this, but I want to keep things concise. I say all of this to say, where is all of this going then? If there is some sort of expansion across dimensional perspectives, this introduction to new domains, what would be the end goal? Is there a such thing as the end? I think that when we ask about the end, we are asking something that lies outside of the scope of our 3D perspective. But if I had to surmise it, the end, the quote unquote end, has already happened, but we cannot be a part of it right now, or it just wouldn't make any sense. For example, I've always found it interesting when you look at scripture that whenever these angels would appear, I know there was the meme with biblically accurate angels. Whenever angels would appear, they would say, don't be afraid, be not afraid. And I always found that curious. But perhaps within this scenario that I'm talking about, what if I told you that this angel talking to you with all of these thousands of eyes and all of this weird geometric stuff going on, what if that's actually you 1 billion years from now? If it tried to explain to you exactly how you two are connected, it wouldn't make any sense. It would sound like complete schizophrenic jarble. But as time goes on, as consciousness expands, it becomes obvious. A 1 billion year gap, it just appears completely distinct and separate and absolutely ludicrous. 500 million years into it, halfway there, it makes a little more sense. And by year 900,999,999, you can clearly see how, this was inevitable. It makes complete and perfect sense. In fact, this was the only way that it could have been. Most of my audience is actually mature. It's people in their 30s. Could you imagine trying to explain to your 8-year-old self all of the intricacies of being an adult, a 30-year-old with all of these responsibilities? It makes no sense to them. You can extrapolate further that all of us came from sperm. Could you imagine how far apart you are from actually being a sperm? But it is where you came from. And in scripture, when you see this figure of Jesus talking, he says some pretty wild, far out things sometimes. He talks about some sort of wedding at the end of time. There's going to be some sort of bridegroom and some sort of ceremony. It's pretty far out there, but perhaps it is something like that we are sort of falling in love with the end. We are sort of growing up into an understanding of what's coming, or more accurately, what we will become. It's kind of like the story of the prodigal son. We are growing up, which begs the question, what does that mean to grow up? When you look at the implications of it, if you are constantly growing up the same way life is evolving, if you are constantly entering a new domain, you are constantly entering into ignorance. You are constantly entering into some sort of state or domain where you have no experience. It is new to you. This is what it means to grow. And when you stop growing, that's pretty much where your story ends. And I think that this is this illusion of growing up, this illusion of thinking that you know it all is actually your journey ceasing. In actuality, you are supposed to endlessly unfold, to endlessly grow. And we are endlessly unfolding into some sort of unfathomable state. It's sort of like with the bride and the wedding, that if we uplifted the veil right now and saw our bride, we would be mortified. It would be completely, we would just not be able to accept it. And what we are doing, consciousness, life, we are learning all about her so that when it is time for this ceremony, we can lift up this veil and finally reunite with the portion of our heart that was missing this whole time. This thing that we are all searching for, clawing for. When you lie in your bed at night and you wonder, this is what you are looking for. But in order for us to get there, we are constantly entering into new domains of ignorance, because what lies for us at the end is true ignorance. Or in other words, it is pure absurdity. It is pure magic. And in a way, you can sort of say it's almost as if God is some sort of baby or child. It is completely irrational. And this is what it is calling us to be. Our greatest minds, they adopted this sort of childlike play, this childlike approach to learning, because they realize if you are learning something, you are perpetually in the state of being a child, of being new, of being ignorant. And this final wedding, this bridegroom, this object waiting for us at the end of time, I believe that is what it is like. It is pure emotion, pure absurdity, pure love. But I absolutely have to end the video here. So if you made it to the end, you were definitely meant to hear this, and I hope that you are able to take something away from it. Like the video if you found it interesting. Comment what you think. I know that this video was one of my more far out there types of videos, so I'm interested to see what everyone has to say. And until next time, y'all have a blessed day.